Hello and good evening. I'm Debbie Kay, Vice President of the League of Women Voters of Portland. Welcome to our Education Forum. The League of Women Voters is a nonpartisan organization that works to help citizens make informed choices in elections. We do not endorse any candidate or political party, but rather we give voters the information they need to select a candidate and decide on ballot measures. Membership information is available on our website, lwvpdx.org. It is also available for those in the room at the table in the back, along with other voter resources, such as our marvelous Voter's Guide. We appreciate support from Metro East Community Media, Paloma Clothing, the Multnomah Bar Foundation, the Weiss Foundation, and the Carol and Velma Sailing Foundation. Plus, we certainly thank Multnomah County government for letting us use this boardroom. We are here on the occupied sacred lands and waters of the indigenous Chinookan people. We will never be as effective a steward as they, though we can certainly aspire to be so with everything that we do. If you have not yet registered to vote, the last day to do so is October 16th. Contact your county elections office or register online with the Oregon Secretary of State. Ballots will be mailed beginning October 17th. Tonight, we have the Multnomah County Auditor panel, which we've just completed. We'll discuss Measure 102 on housing finance, Metro Measure 26199 on affordable housing, and Oregon Measure 105 on the sanctuary state of Oregon.
We turn now to the forum on affordable housing, and there are two measures that we are kind of bifurcating just for the point of discussion. So Oregon Measure 102 allows for local bonds for financing affordable housing, and Metro Measure 26199 issues affordable housing bonds or deals with affordable housing bonds. We're going to start by focusing on Oregon Measure 102, and League of Women Voter Speakers Bureau member Carol Cushman is going to start the discussion. Carol?
Thank you. Measure 102 amends the Constitution, allows local bonds for financing affordable housing with non-governmental agencies, requires voter approval, annual audits. This was referred by the 2018 legislature. It is required that it be referred for a vote of the people because it is a constitutional amendment. Financial impacts are that there will be no state revenues or expenditures created because of this measure, and no required revenues or expenditures for local governments because of this measure. This is enabling legislation only. There can be proposed bonds for affordable housing brought forward by a local government, and it will then require voter approval. But that is a separate vote at the local level at that time. Measure 102 does not raise any funds. Yes vote on this measure removes the restriction that affordable housing projects funded by municipal bonds must be government-owned. It is an amendment to the Constitution, so it will allow bond revenue to be used to fund construction with NGOs without retaining complete ownership. A no vote retains the prohibition on local government to raise money to loan credit to NGOs for any purpose. In the 1800s, we amended the Oregon Constitution to prohibit the use of local funds to be used with private enterprise. Later, the Oregon Supreme Court had a case where the city was not allowed to use general obligation bonds for railroad improvements. The Constitution allows that local government can build affordable housing, but only if it retains ownership. This action was sought by the City of Portland and by other local governments in the metropolitan area. Testimony at the hearing in favor came from the Oregon Housing Alliance, which is a coalition of more than 80 organizations from throughout the state. The current city bond that we have for housing cannot do any building with partnerships at this time. Similarly, the proposed Metro bond without this measure cannot go into partnership with other groups. The difference with Measure 101 is from units that would house 7,500 people to units that will house 12,000 people. The funds will go further in combination with other organizations. Many areas throughout the state lack affordable housing and could make use of this option. It is something that is used in some manner right now with urban renewal areas, but it is not always possible to put every place you want to put affordable housing into an urban renewal area. The proposal will allow local governments to issue bonds to be used in partnership as one part of financing developments. They can include federal low-income tax credits, private capital, and other funds. The expertise of authorities and NGOs to manage ongoing operations of affordable housing is good rather than governments needing to manage the housing once it is built. Supporters of this measure say that it will allow for more affordable housing to be built. It will allow the use of bond dollars in partnership with nonprofit and private housing providers. There is no organized opposition, but opponents have mentioned that we do not amend the Constitution lightly, and the state could use bond money for projects of more widespread benefit, such as roads or parks. Thank you.
Thank you. Now we're going to turn. No, we're not. Now we are. Now we're going to turn to Metro Measure 26199. And audience, obviously you need to think this evening. We went through performance audits, and now you've got to make the distinction here with these two measures, so stay alert. We have two speakers with us tonight, Martha McLennan from the Yes for Affordable Housing Steering Committee, and she was also the former executive director of Northwest Housing Alternative. She's going to speak in favor of the Metro bond, and Dr. Jared Milner, who is Associate Professor of Real Estate Finance at Portland State, will speak against the bond measure. As always, they have 1 minute for opening and closing and 1 minute to answer questions, which of course you're going to forward to us. The timekeepers are in the front, and we'll start with an opening from Martha, if you would, please.
Thank you. And thank you for being here tonight to learn more about this important measure. The social compact had always been that if people worked hard, they could have a safe, stable place to call home. But in the last number of years, rents have been rising much, much more quickly than incomes have been rising, and we are seeing an increasing number of people experiencing homelessness. The homeless student count showed that there were more than 20,000 children in Oregon, school-age children in Oregon, who are experiencing homelessness. If you consider the kids from 0 to 5, that number is probably double. So homelessness is affecting an awful lot of people. In the past, housing affordability was coming from a combination of different sources, but those sources are not there to support that anymore. We need to have local government step up, and that's what the Metro Bond measure will do, is step up to help support affordable housing across our region.
Jordan?
I should start by saying I'm speaking strictly for myself, certainly not for Portland State University or the Center for Real Estate where I work.
Yeah.
I think there are two main problems with this measure. One is that it's not particularly helpful in terms of the housing market. I agree certainly that we need to reduce rents and reduce prices in our region by adding supply. But if you look at the measure, it purports, along with the state measure, if that's passed as well, to produce 3,900 housing units with 30-year bonds. If you do the division, that's 130 housing units per year. 130 housing units per year is puny in a 4-county area that produces 12 to 14,000 housing units per year. So it won't have any measurable impact on market rents or market prices as a result of the project. The second concern that I would have about it is just how few people are being helped and how this is poor social welfare policy. Generally, when we have social welfare policy, we want everyone to benefit, not such a small fraction of the eligible population.
Thank you. And let me ask you, is this the best use of taxpayer money? Could we get more low-income housing with things like developer incentives, tax abatements, or rent vouchers?
I think there's a general misunderstanding in the community about how low-income housing is produced. It's generally produced over time. It's a vintage good. Housing, when it's built new, is typically built for higher income folks, and as it ages, as it depreciates. So just in the same way you would find an affordable refrigerator on Craigslist, you'd find affordable housing by looking for housing that was built in the 50s or the 40s or the 60s that's depreciated. So new construction is probably your most expensive way to produce affordable housing. I think of the options, I think buying existing housing is probably the least inefficient, and it's good to see that the measure is having half of the dollars spent to build to buy up existing housing. But of course, that does absolutely nothing to boost the supply.
Martha?
So the federal government was a really large player in the affordable housing business. From the 1940s to the 1980s, they participated in financing 20% of the multifamily housing stock that was built in this country. Since that time, their participation rate has dropped significantly. At this point, they only participate in building about 6% of the housing that's built. That is the biggest reason that we have less affordable housing now than we did then. There are other things that have contributed to it, the recession, but fundamentally, we need to have public investment to make sure that we have affordable housing. Local governments are one of the places that should come from. The state is another place, and the federal government is a third. Working together, we can address this problem and make sure everyone has a safe place to call home.
And Martha, if you would follow up with, what has been done since the 2016 Metro Auditor Report to improve Metro's management of capital improvement projects? What outcomes will Metro monitor to ensure that bond money is spent as voters intended?
So Metro engaged in a lengthy process with both a steering committee of stakeholders and a steering committee of technical advisors to create a framework for this bond. They've established goals in terms of the number of units, the household size, the geographic dispersal, the income level of people served, and the equity issues that can be addressed with this housing. All of those things will be monitored publicly, basically, by an oversight committee whose reports will be public and shared. So through those techniques, they'll make sure that this money is spent well. They're also working in strong partnership. Metro will not be the implementing body. The housing authorities and the local governments in the region will select the projects and specify what goals will be met and monitor to make sure that they are.
Okay, George?
I don't think the problem with the bond measure is, malfeasance at Metro. As was stated, they're basically a pass-through agency. The counties are going to be responsible for implementing the bond measure. I think the problem is that they're building units and not giving people vouchers. If you look at federal housing policy, one of the major changes that we made in the 1970s was to switch from a supply-oriented program to a demand-oriented program through Section 8, giving people vouchers, letting them shop for housing on their own. The academic studies that have looked at supply-oriented programs suggest that we lose about a third of the benefit by giving people particular units rather than giving people the buying power to shop for the unit that fits their family needs. And the changes in family needs can come from any sorts of reasons: family dissolution, being unhappy with schools. I think we should give them the same right to spend their money like we do senior citizens or people on food stamps, give them something that's portable.
I'm going to stick in a question here because I need it for clarification on the next question. Do we need to define affordable housing? What level?
It's defined in federal law as 30% of income. And so the way that both the voucher programs as well as the supplier-owned programs are structured, the tenant is responsible for reporting their income and then paying 30% of that in rent, with the balance being covered by the grant.
Okay. Martha, is that in agreement? Or?
In the Metro measure, they call for about 40% of the money to serve people below 30% of the area median income. The bulk after that to serve people below 60% of area median income, and a small percent to serve people up to 80% of the area median income. In the state measure, income is not defined, but it does call for local governments who bring a bond before their voters to establish an affordability target for each bond in particular, but that's the Metro affordability level.
All right, then I think you can decide how you want to answer this one. How many units are needed now for the lowest income level, and how many in the next 3 to 5 years?
So there is a desperate need for affordable housing. Across the state, they estimate that number, the difference between the people's income, what they can afford to pay in rent, and units that are at that price is 135,000 units. In the metro area, that number is probably north of 45,000 units. So this is a big problem. We have many, if not the majority of people in our region right now spending more than half of their income, the low-income households spending more than half of their income on their housing. That means they don't have enough left for health care, for nutrition, for transportation, for child care. So this is a piece of the puzzle. Portland is working on affordable housing in their measure. This was the Metro measure. The state has been issuing a different kind of bond to support affordable housing, so they've been working on it as well. But it is continuing to take bites at that apple to get to the problem and address it.
Jordan?
I think that illustrates the problem. If the need is for 70,000 or 100,000 units and you're only providing 3, and you're funding them through 30-year bonds, either you're suggesting that we're going to tolerate a world where only 5% of the people who are eligible receive a benefit, in other words, creating a lottery, or there's bond number 2, bond number 3, bond number 4, bond number 5. I don't think that's going to happen. And so I think this program as designed is highly inequitable. I don't think that it's the responsibility of Metro to be managing a welfare program. I don't think they have the capability to manage a welfare program. And frankly, it's not the right level of government. It should be at the highest level. It should be at the federal and the state level that income maintenance should be managed.
Okay, then try this one. This is a Metro-wide bond measure. How will the money be divided?
It's going to be divided, as I understand it, according to the counties by their population. So the counties will actually implement it. Metro is basically serving as the regional taxpayer. There are some admirable aspects about it. The fact that it's being funded by the general fund, but again, I just think it's completely inadequate for the task.
Martha?
Yes, it will be divided across the region by population. They looked at that from the perspective of population, poverty, tax generation, a number of different mechanisms, and ultimately decided to allocate it across the region in this way. Again, the housing problem that we have is a regional problem. The housing market is not a Portland-specific issue. It is a regional issue, and so we need a regional solution. And Metro is the local government that can bring that issue forward.
Will the 5% cap on administrative fees cover all the administrative expenses at Metro, cities, counties, and housing nonprofits?
So, probably not. But again, this is a commitment that the local governments that are participating in this effort are working on. There's an agreement that administrative amount will be equitably split between the participating jurisdictions. So it's not going to be at Metro. They do have some governance responsibilities by issuing this bond that they must fulfill, but they recognize that the other partners in implementing the project will also need resources to help them do that.
Sure.
The waste doesn't come from the 5% overhead. The waste comes from giving people particular units. And if the tenant becomes in any ways kind of sideways with their designated landlord, or their child has trouble in the school and they want to send the child to a different school, or if they get a job opportunity moving to another part of the county or another part of the region, they can't take the benefit with them. They're locked in place. As it were, if they find a better unit, they're going to have to both move up to market as well as pay more for that better unit. So I think what it tends to do, what these kind of programs tend to do, is they tend to lock people in place where they stay housed in the unit, rather than having the flexibility that you or I have to shop in the market for the housing that best suits our needs.
I think this question is related. Let's see. If the bond measure passes, how long will the units produced remain affordable?
Well, there's two questions you're asking. One is time of construction, right? And that's,
Yeah,
or the other is length of affordability.
I think length of affordability is where this is going.
Is it 99 years, right? Isn't that the expectation?
That's the City of Portland policy at this point.
Right.
Yes.
Okay, so you both agree on that. Let's see if we can get another one in here. If this fails, and let's see, Gerard, you're going to start us on this if you would. If it fails, what would you recommend to meet the need?
Well, I have argued for a long time that we need a vigorous housing production program within our metro area. We underproduced by about 50,000 housing units during the Great Recession. But if you looked at the way in which we're permitting units right now, we're probably about 10% below what we were in 1990 to 2007. So we both got a huge deficit in terms of overall market level of housing production. And despite the fact that our population is much higher than it used to be, we're producing less than we were before. I think the problem lies with Metro. I mean, that's part of the irony. Metro has only expanded the urban growth boundary by 10% in 40 years when the population has grown by over 80%. We also have the City of Portland, who's implemented an inclusionary zoning policy, which has basically shut down the multifamily market. So while we're producing quite a few units right now that are apartments, we won't be producing very many at all in 2020 in the City of Portland. So I think there are real problems, but I don't think this has anything to do with those problems.
Martha?
Can you repeat the question?
I can if I can find it. Yes, here we go. If this fails, what would you recommend to meet the need?
So as an affordable housing developer for 16 years in a nonprofit and for 22 years with the City of Portland before that, I've been working on the issue of affordable housing. We've basically been cobbling together every penny that we can find to do as much as we can, and we are not keeping pace. We need more investment, and we need it to be substantial, and we need to have effective mechanisms to do that. There are definitely issues in expediting the development process, streamlining it, simplifying it. I would agree with all those things, but that will not in itself produce affordable housing. It may produce more housing, but not affordable housing. So if we don't do this, I think we need to, again, go back to each local government, ask what they can do, go back to the state and go back to the federal government and ask what they can do, but we need to prepare ourselves for the number of people that will be homeless in our communities.
Okay, and Martha, try this one. Is it known what share of funds will be spent to build new units, increasing the total number available, and what share will be spent to renovate existing units? And if not, how will that decision be made?
The decision will be made by the local governments that are participating in this, so the housing authorities or the county governments, along with a couple of cities who have said that they want to be active in that. The framework was designed, the modeling about how many units could be produced was designed with the notion that up to 50% could be acquisition of existing buildings. You may remember the Holgate Manor was in the media a while back. A strong community that was suddenly upended because of a sale of that property. That's a kind of example where you might want to go in and acquire a property and preserve it, basically. But there's also new construction that can be built. Ultimately, that will be the decision of the different jurisdictions, how much they spend on one and how much on the other. But again, the modeling, the framework was based on a 50-50 split.
Gerard, any comments?
Certainly, if you're looking for how fast you can implement the program and reduce the cost, you would want to buy existing units. And that's both because it can happen right away, but also because the depreciated nature of those existing units is a good match for the financial abilities of the households who'd be renting them. You would not, so the alternative, which is to build a lot of new housing, which will happen from this project, or from this proposal, we'll be building a lot of expensive housing. Typically in our region, new single-family home construction sells for about $110,000 more per housing unit than existing housing does. And the same applies to apartments. New apartments are going to have that new apartment smell. They're not going to have mossy roofs or cracked sidewalks in front. They're going to rent for a much higher price than existing units. And so if we were to focus on existing units, we would get more bang for the buck. But of course, again, we would be reducing no housing.
And I just got the question, so hold on, Gerard. Developers complain that affordable housing projects don't pencil out, meaning that they can't make profits. How can we change the situation?
How can I change reality is the question you're asking me. I mean, it's a bit like trying to ask, why don't car makers make $5,000 cars? You can find $5,000 cars, but nobody's producing them new. So, again, if you're going to shop for an inexpensive car, you go to 82nd Street. You find a car that's, lived a life and is now ready for you. And I think the same thing would apply to households if we gave them vouchers. The low-income households would look for units that were built 40, 50 years ago. They would have extra buying power because of the voucher, and that's how they would find housing.
Martha?
Okay, let's see. A couple things there. One, the voucher notion. Yes, people could use vouchers to find housing. It has resulted in concentrations of poverty across our region that are unhealthy, that have created places where kids are not thriving, where there's not opportunity for people to have access to transportation, to jobs, to good schools, all the things that they need to thrive. So having a program that really just says, let them find the cheapest unit on the market, the most substandard unit on the market, the worst neighborhood in the region, as a solution is not a good way to create a healthy community. The rents that will be charged are going to be rents that are based on what people can afford. So if you think of somebody who is on Social Security, average Social Security, $1,200 a month, that household shouldn't pay more than about $500 for their housing. This program will allow them to pay that and do it in a healthy unit, in a healthy environment.
Thank you. We turn now to our closings. And Martha, if you get started. Whew, take a big breath. Right.
This goes very quickly. Again, we started with the premise that if people worked hard, they could have a safe, stable place to call home. They might even have an opportunity for home ownership. That is now out of reach for most of the people who are hardworking people with lower incomes. We have kids moving from school to school, trying to find a place that's affordable because the rent where they're at is getting raised again by hundreds of dollars. We need to start addressing this problem in a serious way. This measure really is a big step forward in terms of doing that. I hope that we can ensure that people have this safe place to call home, and this measure will help do that. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Gerard?
I'm going to respond mostly to Martha's recent comments because I think they need to be corrected. I do not think this is a big step forward. I think this is a little step backwards. I think if you were to look at housing projects that they've been built in the United States for the last 70 years, those are the pockets of poverty. I mean, I think that if you look at how vouchers are actually spent, it's true. Yes, people will spend them in the neighborhoods that they're familiar with, but they'll make adjustments according to their preferences. They're very decentralized. There is no ribbon cutting with a Section 8 voucher in the same way there's a ribbon cutting with the construction or the acquisition of a new housing project. Martha also says that rents are going to be tailored as a percentage of income. That's not exactly true. To do that, what the counties are going to have to do is to take some of their existing vouchers and convert them into project-based assistance. And for new construction, my understanding is that's exactly what the proponents are hoping to do. So what my fear is that a lot of the recipients are really going to lose the choice that they would normally get through vouchers and instead be forced into a particular unit that they may or may not need.
Okay, thank you. And my thanks to both of you. As we can tell, this is a complex issue, and you've made it very, well, your answers were clear. I don't know that you made the issue clear, but at any rate. So, I would also like to thank Metro East Community Media for recording and for all the volunteers and for the audience with your questions. Please check our website, lwvpdx.org, to view all our forums and for TV replay information. For more election information, pick up our nonpartisan voters guide, which is in the back of the room here for you locally, at the local public library, New Seasons Market, or Meals on Wheels Dining Center, or go to vote411.org. I also want to alert you that there is, in fact, a contested circuit court judge position, which is described in here. It's something that doesn't usually happen, so you may want to get that information. Election Day is November 6th. As in all Oregon elections, you will receive a mail-in ballot. Ballots must be delivered to an official drop-off site no later than 8 p.m. on Tuesday, November 6th, or mailed back early enough to arrive by that time. Postmarks do not count. Thank you for watching. Thank you for being here, for being informed. Remember that your vote is very important. And thanks to both of you.